I would like to say, first of all, this is a fascinating report. Despite a wonderful overview, well worth reading the whole thing. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful piece of work. I want to be depressed for a little bit and say I find the result that only between 16% in France and 29% of people in the UK who are interested citizens, already a sympathetic audience, only between 16 and 29% of people disagreed with the statement that most aid to developing countries is wasted. And as many as 52% in France, but high numbers everywhere, said that across the rich countries, said that international organizations and developed country governments were the primary force for development in developing countries. Yet, a small minority in most of these countries thought that their governments had actually made much of a difference, made a big difference to development over the last 10 years. Take those things together, you get this sympathetic group basically thinking that poor countries are incapacitated. The only thing that can help is rich countries can't help very much because poor countries are so corrupt, and we're not seeing very much progress. We've seen similar results before in other surveys. 81% of people in Britain, for example, think that we have a moral responsibility to help improve the lives of poor people in poor countries. The number is similar in the United States, but if you look for support in the UK for aid, it's dropped quite dramatically over the last 3 or 4 years. We can all think of reasons why, but people are saying that one of the reasons for this drop is that they're saying that the percentage who say that most aid is wasted has gone from 44 to 57% in the UK, and the UK is comparatively optimistic on this stuff, right? So it's a widespread feeling you get from this report and elsewhere that we're the only people who can help, and there's a huge corruption problem in developing countries that makes it very hard to help. I would call that the white man's burden complex. I think it's not just the title of Bill Easterly's book. It's actually a real thing that is out there and large and really depressing for those of us who work in the industry. One, it leads to bad aid. It leads to aid that says we have to manage it all because they're useless. Two, it leads to aid fatigue. What we've been giving all of this aid in order to make these places better, and they're still terrible and they're still corrupt. And worse, it depresses other really powerful forms of engagement with the developing world. So if you think that the developing world is a complete basket case, you are less likely to try and trade with them, you are less likely to try and invest in them. So all sorts of other avenues, frankly more powerful avenues, despite the huge role for aid, all sorts of other avenues are cut off because of this general attitude. It's wrong. It's completely wrong, right? That's the other problem with this view. If you look over the last 10 years of history in the developing world, Africa has got, I can't remember, 3 or 4 of the fastest growing countries in the world, our traditional basket case, Africa. Mortality is falling, investment is rising. We're not going to meet the goal of universal primary completion by 2015, but we're going to get awfully close. There's actually a huge amount of positive stuff going on in the developing world, which suggests that this story of basket caseness is wrong. And, again, huge and important role for aid, but aid to the average recipient country is 1% of their GDP. It's not the major player in what's going on. It has a hugely important role. Smallpox eradication, we're awfully close to polio eradication. That is an aid-driven story. I don't want to downplay the importance of aid, but aid is not the primary driver of these changes. It's what's going on in developing countries, done by people in developing countries and the governments of those countries that is by far the most powerful driver of change. And that is a message we, as a development community, really need to get across. It's not all hopeless. They're not all corrupt basket cases. They are making really powerful changes, and we can help and we can leverage change using aid, but it's helping and leveraging, not, charity to the useless and infirm. And unless we manage to overcome this huge problem with people's perception of the developing world, I think we're stuck.
And I appreciate, as I said to Charles, you'll rile them up, depress them, and run away. It reminds me of I guess it was Henry David Thoreau who said, if I knew someone was coming to do me good, I'd go in the opposite direction as quickly as possible. But I think the sadder or depressing part of what Charles said is also, I think, showing that we have made some progress with engagement and education. Sadder but wiser may, in fact, be a better, may show progress in terms of some of the people we're trying to get to. But as Peter says, I'd like to, come with me at least in a time machine for a few years back to talk about how my organization, which again, it's sui generis, it's Catholic Relief Services, it's the official Catholic Relief and Development Organization of the U.S. Church, and we have a natural constituency in U.S. Catholics. We have offices in over 50 countries. We fund projects in over 100. But about 15 to 20 years ago, we were so struck, both in terms of the logistics and the horror of what was going on in Africa, particularly if you think about the Angola War restarting, the Somalia famine in 1992, the Rwanda genocide, that we took a deep look at ourselves and said we're not doing something right here if we're working in places for years and some of the conflicts and some of the tragedies that are occurring, our approaches need to be looked at more closely. And we went back to our roots, including our mission statement from 1943, which said we need to educate Americans about their role, and in our case, particularly Catholics. And we weren't doing this job. And so intentionally, we began setting out a process, and it's been very slow, and I think the gains have been modest, but I think we do have something to show for it, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So we set up and established several offices in the United States, not for fundraising, but for engagement, advocacy, and other ways to connect to this U.S. constituency that we had really depended on for funding, but had not really engaged in the content of our work. And I think that's where we see a number of different connections with the study results that we've just talked about. I also think that these examples, and some of the people in the room who've been working particularly on the issues around the foreign aid budget here in the United States will find some of these findings very familiar. They show that we certainly have a long way to go, but at the same time, I think we are beginning to make some inroads. And the lessons learned show that in our case, we had developed over the past 10 years a number of a core advocacy group, an activist group, that was certainly, when we rang the alarms about foreign aid budgets about a year and 2 years ago, they were ready to go to work with us. But we hit a brick wall with what we might call the traditional donor base and other non-core advocacy constituencies. And the One Campaign and others who had also done some research that is somewhat similar had also found that some of the ways that we needed to adjust our outreach would actually improve the response for this non-activist core or non-activist group that we have been trying to reach. Some of them were very basic for those who are familiar with foreign aid engagement here in the United States, and not just about development, or not more broadly about development. How small the poverty-based, the poverty-focused foreign aid budget is. What has been accomplished, and getting very concrete about those particular sectors where, as Charles just said, there has been progress, and it connects directly to people's experience in some cases. So childhood immunizations, hunger, education, some of the progress that we've talked about. Highlighting the effects of foreign aid on real people and real communities. And again, part of what we've been doing is taking lay people, to overseas, having them come back and do speaking tours, connecting people with where they are. In our case, particularly around church activities, but not only, including in high schools, colleges, and universities as well. Again, changing the language. We can't use the word food security. We can't use the technical jargon, but breaking it down and to talk specifically, and in the case of the foreign aid budget, that cuts can cost lives. Linking it, and again, there are others in the room who have also have been working on these same approaches, that that hurting certain kinds of budget cuts can hurt the poor most of all, and whether that's here at the United States or overseas. And so connecting the issues and the ways in which development issues affect Americans, as well as people overseas who the communities that we serve. In the case of CRS, our natural constituencies, both here in the United States and among Catholics, but also all the churches, and for that matter, all the secular organizations that we fund and support overseas. So in a sense, we have that double constituency, and we bring those folks from overseas not only to talk to senators and members of Congress, but also to talk to our constituency about what's going on. Every step of the way in terms of this foreign aid budget process, we kept people informed, and we gave them multiple ways to take action. So Twitter, Facebook, providing scripts for the social media, letters to the editor, samples, getting Grasstops leaders to help place op-eds in local papers. celebrating success when we've actually held back a major cut. Those were some of the ways that we tried to do it. And so in this campaign actually garnered more grassroots and grasstops engagement than really any other previous advocacy campaign. And it was about a foreign aid budget, despite the very real skepticism about foreign aid. So that was interesting. Two other quick examples, and then I think we want to open it up for discussion pretty soon. And one is on extractive industries. This is a pretty complex subject. You know, the ways in which revenues from oil, minerals, and other kinds of extractive resources, including hardwoods, can actually contribute to war, conflict. Again, the things that are really the antithesis of development and can undermine in so many ways the work that we're doing. And we were so surprised that this caught on among our constituency. One reason we think is because we did the speaker tours, including folks from Congo, both church leaders, doctors, and others, connecting the violence and the problems in, let's say, in eastern Congo to the purchase of cell phones, which might contain minerals that were mined illegally or exported illegally. And so that idea that you're connecting the issue to people's lives, how they consume, how they vote, how they invest, this was a way to resonate. We try to do the same thing with fair trade, coffee and chocolate, and linking it to programs in, let's say, in Central America or Africa. So that's another way. And finally, on Sudan, the transition and the referendum that led to the new country of South Sudan, this was not an ask about money. It was an ask about Americans praying, educating themselves, and advocating towards the administration to take seriously the referendum process and not to support the date that had been set for that. This had remarkable resonance, and again, we may have been helped both with the extractives and the Sudan example with celebrities. So I'm not discounting their presence, and we can probably get into a long conversation about Coney 2012, and frankly, the conversation that occurred afterwards. No, we don't want to, but I think educating for the long haul in our case means, you know, not only paying attention to some of the recommendations that have already been made. In our case, it means creating a Spanish language website. It means also taking the time to explain issues, simplifying in some cases, but not dumbing down, and certainly not presenting a solution, some kind of panacea for problems that are going to take a much longer time to address. And so those are some of the lessons that we offer.